Hello, friends, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Speaking of Equity. I'm your host, Cornelius Godfrey, and here at the Speaking of Equity podcast, we believe all conversations are conversations about equity. And we're delighted to be joined in this conversation with one of our very own school leaders of Leonard Elementary, Dr. Erin Detmer. Welcome, Dr. Detmer.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm excited to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. So you happen to be on is this a virtual week for your students?
Yes, this week all of our little ones are learning from home. We have parent-teacher conferences sprinkled in every day. And so it's a different change of pace this week.
Yeah, so we're dating this episode. If it airs at a time when virtual learning is no longer a thing, first, hooray. And second, remember when we did that? Remember how fun that was?
Yes, exactly. It will definitely be hallmarked in history for sure.
So one of the things that I was really hoping to accomplish in this leader series is to give our community an opportunity to see what their leaders are thinking in terms of equity. And I really appreciate you and all the other leaders who've allowed some very frank and candid conversation to be recorded, which is always fun. We appreciate being able to share that those who are at the helm of our, great district are really thinking in thoughtful ways about how to expand and advance equity in our buildings and classrooms. And I think this is an opportunity to give a bit of a peek behind that curtain. So thank you again. And in beginning our conversation, I know that because we've had a chance to chat before, equity is something that means a lot to you. And I wonder, where does that motivation come from? How do you connect with this conversation in ways that keep you excited and invigorated and enthused to see this work all the way through?
Absolutely. I feel like being motivated and energized to do this work around equity is probably easiest found in the faces of the kids that I serve, in the faces of the children at Leonard and my own daughter at home. It's important to me that every single kid sees themselves as valued and as important. And I know the role I play in my building in leading the community at Leonard, to know that every child will walk through our doors knowing that he or she is important, that they are valued, that they see themselves in their classroom communities and their books and their friends and their peers, that they're respected, they're honored. I feel like that is my driving motivation to make sure that all kids enter and then eventually leave our halls knowing how important they are and that they matter and that they make a difference.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I appreciate that as both an educator and a parent. And you mentioned your daughter as a part of your motivation. And I really appreciate that because personally, I find a lot of motivation from my children. And I know that, as parents, we have a pretty high expectation of ourselves to be able to answer some of these really difficult questions that our children can ask from time to time. How have you been challenged in your efforts to raise your children with, an understanding of what it means to be equitable and an understanding of justice and even history? And in what ways do you think that your journey as a parent differs from maybe your own parents?
That is such a good question. I'm going to be 100% honest here in that my journey has my daughter's 8.5, almost 9. She's a third grader. And I've changed, my husband and I have changed in our philosophical ideals over the past 8 or 9 years. I know that no kids are born with hate. No kids are born with biases or prejudices or discriminations. It's the society that we live in that enculturates those things and those beliefs and those ideas into children. And so I used to think when my daughter was young that if I didn't speak hatefully, if I preached love and acceptance and almost, it pains me to say this, but this idea of colorblindness that we now know that I now know is harmful. But when she was younger, if I didn't draw her attention to those things, then she wouldn't know about those things, and she would treat everybody equally. And over the years, I've learned, though, how important it is for me, and truly what a privileged spot I was coming from by having those thoughts and those parenting styles. That being a white mother, I have colleagues and friends and counterparts who don't have that privilege of ignoring the inequities or the differences between children and between families. And so over the years, I've changed. And so we have conversations now. It's important for me that my daughter grows up knowing that a family is a group of people who love each other, and that can look and feel different from house to house or houses to houses. And that my upbringing as a white woman in a middle-class family, in a heteronormative family, is my truth, but it's not the truth. There are so many ways to be open. And I feel like my daughter is growing in understanding that this is what our family looks like, but just, that the neighbors down the street or across the yard or cousins or friends or families, we all have families that love us and that might look a little different. And so as a parent, it has really pushed me to make sure that I'm having conversations with her about justice and about history and about, especially over this past year with everything that has happened that started with George Floyd and drawing all the BLM movement to the mainstream media, having conversations about her and with her about why that matters and why these are things we are a part of and we believe in. It's been interesting to me personally to reflect on my change over the past 8 or 9 years.
Yeah, and thank you so much for modeling and demonstrating that every day as a parent and every day as an educator is an opportunity to get it right, and how wonderful it is that we're raising kids at home and teaching kids at school who are willing to see the world as a dynamic place where things can change and understandings do grow. And how amazing that our kids have educators and administrators and parents who are willing to have that kind of growth mindset and are able to see themselves as constantly able to learn and challenge their own thinking. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate how you have identified identity as something that is, playing a central role for you, and how your understandings have developed, and how you're also helping your daughter to come to know that her own identity is really centering her own understanding of the world, and how other people's identities play a very different role in the way they see the world. I wonder if you could share with us how some of your identity markers have shaped your ability to really connect with the work of equity, and if some of those things have either challenged, helped, or hindered your understanding of the importance of this work.
Absolutely. I feel like, as I said just a few minutes ago, as a white middle-class hetero woman, I feel in most cases I'm part of the dominant culture, and especially in education. I feel knowing that women are more dominant in the educational field, maybe not so much in administration, but at least in the general term, I've never felt othered or outsided. And I recognize that privilege that exists in that statement that I just said. But I also realize that it positions me to have the opportunity for an open mind and for empathy, to recognize that my experiences are not the same as others. And that a crossroads for me has always been, I would like to say, my age as an identity marker, and that I was not super young, but fairly young when I took on the administrative role at Leonard, and to be able to prove myself more to myself than to anyone else. It was more to show myself that I could take on this responsibility, knowing that I want to be an incredible role model and a leader that positions the community to learn and grow academically, socially, and emotionally along the way. And so I feel like the age has probably been the one that has impacted me the most. But as I grow, that kind of diminishes. So I see I've been fortunate, privileged is probably the better word, privileged that I haven't been forced to confront too many of my identity markers, because I've chosen a path that has made me part of a dominant cult. Like, it's made me comfortable. And that's not bad, but now that I'm aware of it, it helps me to see the world a little differently.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you naming, your experiences and positioning them as opportunities to use some of those privileges as a lever to pull to create equity for those who might not have those same ones. I appreciate that, at the seat of power at Leonard Elementary, there's someone who understands that they have a very significant role to play in ensuring there's an equitable experience, and then using those opportunities as ways to strike a balance in places where there is inequity. And I wonder, as we're kind of moving toward, your, development and understanding, I wonder if there have been any resources, experiences, or relationships that have really impacted you along your journey and helped you come to the place where you are now.
Oh my goodness. So many. I feel like that could be a whole nother podcast. Truly, I feel like my friendships have probably been the biggest influence on my thinking and on my growth. Leaders right within our district who I respect incredibly. Natalie Hazerbrook, Christine Griefor, David Recker, sharing with me resources that, oh my goodness, I've read this book. You've got to take a look. You've got to read this article. I think that's where it probably started. And then after reading so many texts, I think probably one of the first that really shook me was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. I remember reading that book and just being completely opened to new thinking and pushing myself as a woman, as an educator, as a teacher, as a human. And then reading all of the controversy surrounding it, saying, how come a white woman is now supposed to be saving, all these others are like, oh no, the first book I read is like, it's not good. And, but then coming back to the realization that any on-ramp is an on-ramp, and it's a great way to start thinking. So that book really did influence my thinking quite profoundly. I've read so many great things too by Kendi and by the recent book by Frederick Joseph, and then having conversations with my teachers and with the children and the parents in my building have shaped my thinking. And always being a part of like Teachers College, their Equity Institute this past year has pushed my thinking in ways to help others along their journey as well. Well, we all know this is personal, and you really need to start with yourself. Being a leader, I don't have the option to ignore change in others. So while obviously focusing on myself is paramount, having those professional experiences that provide opportunities for me to think through how I can coach my staff and their personal journeys as well has been really influential. Thinking back historically, I as part of my PhD program, I took an amazing class at OU with Tony Walters, Professor Walters. And it was the first introduction I had 15, 20 years ago to this idea of white privilege, and how the idea of racism isn't this good, bad binary, and that good people can be racist. And that racism is truly a systemic problem, and that we need to think through how to change systems, and that people in power have the moral obligation to think through how we can change policies and practices so that there's equal access and opportunity for all. And that seed was planted back then, but I didn't cultivated, I don't think, because I wasn't involved in daily conversations to push my thinking and to push action forward. And it's exciting to see, for my own personal growth and for our growth as a district, that these are conversations that are happening regularly now, and that action is tied to the ends of these conversations. So I'm hopeful that this path continues forward, and brings about good change for all kids.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate how you've even been reflective on your reflecting. I think that's pretty amazing. And, I've heard some of the controversies surrounding D'Angelo as well. But what I think is important to note is that she, in that moment when she's using, her voice in her book, is really exercising a degree of her own privilege to extend equity to those who might not have those privileges, because she's able to connect with audiences that I, as a Black man, could potentially, not be able to connect with. Like there's a very real advantage that she has with her target audience, and I appreciate that she's, doing the work to make the change where she can. And those changes are not easy to make. And as we wrap up our conversation, I'm wondering, what are the ways that you've positioned yourself as a leader, but also a listener in conversations with people who philosophically are really challenged with this work and the validity and necessity of it, and are really struggling to meet with, the relevance of, efforts toward advancing equity? How have you positioned yourself as a leader, but also a listener? And, what postures would you recommend others who are equally concerned at challenging the growth of others to make as they, endeavor to do that?
That is a really heavy question there, Mr. Cornelius Godfrey. I feel that relationships are at the center of all we do, of change, of growth. And so as a leader, I believe that my number one priority is to establish trusting relationships with those around me. And that by doing so, I invite conversations, I invite listening. I feel with my staff in particular, it's about modeling, it's about being open, it's about being transparent, it's about making, in schools, little tangent, we have two resources that are hot commodities: time and money. And where you put those tells a lot about what you value. And so making sure that in the professional development plan that I have for my school, that we spend our time and money on things that matter, like equity. And so carving out time on a very regular basis to learn about things such as representing all children in curriculum, and how do we use our children's literature to have mirrors and windows, because all children deserve to see themselves in the pages of the text that they read and the curriculum they learn about. And they also need to see others, to learn about other cultures and other lifestyles, to develop empathy and grow as humans. So as a leader, it's my job to make sure that those resources of time and money are spent in a way that promotes learning for all. As a human, I think some of the hardest work I do in this field is more on a personal level than it is on a professional one. I'm very grateful that in my professional circle, most of the people that I work with on a daily basis are invested in this work and see the necessity for this work and want to have these conversations. At a personal level, it's hardest to be completely honest with family members who have seen themselves or don't see racism as an issue or equity as an issue, that don't understand the need to elevate all. Not that there's hate there, but just a lack of understanding of the systemness of racism. And for me personally, having the courage to say something to a loved one has taken me time. But I've been very, I realize I'm being incredibly vulnerable here today, sir. But it's taken the time, and I'm proud that I've learned how to push back in a way that I believe fosters growth and reflection for all. Because ultimately, I love the new terms that have come out. Like, we don't want to live in a cancel culture. I don't want my family members I don't want to be like, oh, never talking to that person again. I don't want it to be like that. It's better for the world when we call folks in. And so how can I teach the people I love and share what I've learned, so that one more person is on this journey and on this path with me to make this world a better place. And I think that as we think about growing this and sharing this, advice I would give to others is just that. You can't change others. You can only change yourself and your reactions to others. And so when you find yourself in a moment, decide what matters to you. What's one thing you could say? What's one book you could recommend? What's one thing you feel passionate about that you feel that it wouldn't be okay for this to be unsaid? And then above all else, just listen. I feel so often people assume they know what others are thinking or feeling, based upon previous experiences or encounters with someone they assume are similar. And then most often you would be wrong in making those assumptions. So taking the time to listen to where people are coming from. If you listen to them, they will be more likely to listen to you when you have something to share back. And hopefully both people can leave the conversation a little stronger and better for having had an interaction with each other. I know that was all over the place, but.
Oh no, that was solid gold there, Dr. Detmer. I appreciate you sharing it. And I appreciate you connecting it with, both your personal and professional practice, because I think there's so much intersection in between those two things. The way that we conduct ourselves in our personal lives really does drive the priorities we set forward in our professional lives. And how great it is for us to know that, one of our beloved leaders at our elementary level is thinking in ways that prioritizes with both time and resources, the lifting of voices and the equitable environments and fostering those for our children who so desperately need to see that they are valuable, that they're seen, heard, and loved in their classrooms and buildings. So again, I really appreciate you taking your time. We value it and we value you. And we're grateful that we're able to share this conversation with the community. And thank you all for tuning in. We appreciate you taking the time to listen to this conversation and all the others from our leaders on Speaking of Equity. We hope that you are challenged in your thinking and your growth. And we hope that you'll tune in again on the next episode of Speaking of Equity.